thank you, President Dr. Ziegler, for that wonderful, warm introduction. Ich bin Berliner. Today, I would like to talk with you about turning points, about Zeitenwende, about the world we live in now and how it has changed, about the difficult road to peace and democracy that we often take for granted, and about what these times of great change require. As Chancellor Scholz put it so credibly and forcefully, 3 days after Russia's invasion of Ukraine, if we want the last 30 years to be more than a historical exception, then we must do everything we can to forge even closer relations with our friends, our partners, and all those who share our convictions worldwide. On February 17th, I presented my credentials to President Steinmeier here in Berlin as the US ambassador to Germany. The next day, the very next day, I joined the Munich Security Conference. The main discussion topic, no surprise, was the potential consequences of a Russian invasion. The potential consequences. Days later, Russia invaded with a brutality that absolutely shocked decent people worldwide. There have indeed been consequences for President Putin. Consequences he never foresaw. He thought Ukraine would fall. Ukraine stands strong against his brutal forces. He thought he would show the absolute might of Russia. Russia is shown to be no might against the force of Ukraine and their courage. He banked on NATO being split. NATO has never been more united than it is today. I see that unity in our work with partners at all levels of the German government and German civil society, and I am greatly appreciative of that. And I know I speak for so many in my country, including the administration and Congress, by saying how grateful we are for Germany and the United States' unity. That unity is also reflected in 3 key goals that will guide my team's diplomatic work moving forward. And I can state these goals very simply, in 8 words, I think. Advance our alliances, innovate inclusively, and defend democracy. These goals sound simple, they're short and to the point. But in fact, they represent the complex and difficult challenges we face in the United States, in Germany, and all around the world. These goals will direct the work of our embassy and our 5 consulates. I've already had the pleasure of visiting our consulates in Frankfurt, Leipzig, and Hamburg. Hamburg just yesterday. My travels in the next couple weeks will take me to Munich and to Düsseldorf, and of course to many, many places in Germany, all over the country. I'm especially looking forward to visiting Feuchtwangen. That is a town in Bavaria where my father was born and brought up. I've never been. In 1934, he was forced to leave his apprenticeship and flee Nazi Germany. Why? You know why. He was Jewish. It was the only reason why. His courage and his foresight saved the lives of his entire family. He instilled in me the absolute importance, the essentialness of standing up strongly against all forms of hatred, bigotry, and discrimination. Seeing them for what they are and taking action. As the first-generation daughter of a refugee, I never dreamed that I would one day become the president of the University of Pennsylvania, among America's oldest and the world's most innovative universities. I also never dreamed that President Joe Biden would one day call me personally and ask me to be ambassador to the very country my father fled. Yet so much of my life's history, as I reflect, and my life's work has actually led me to this moment. A journey like mine is possible not only in the United States, but it's part of what makes me proud of my country. The journey started almost 90 years ago when my father fled Nazi Germany. He later found a new home and a life where I was born in the United States. But he did not witness a united, prosperous, democratic Germany. The Holocaust, World War II, the Cold War, the fall of the Berlin Wall that occasioned so much of what we now celebrate. These were critically important eras in world history. It is hard to absorb this when one is living through it, but today we are at another critically important juncture in history. Einen Zeitenwende. Our coordinated response to Russia's invasion of Ukraine demonstrates a new unity of purpose and action, a new period in transatlantic solidarity. As we confront new threats to global peace and security, the US-German relationship and friendship could not be more important, Mission Germany, the embassy, and our 5 consulates, we have a vital role to play in ensuring a revitalized transatlantic relationship that goes far beyond ending Putin's brutal, cruel, inhumane war, far beyond it. And it is more than an honor for me to serve as the US ambassador to Germany and to lead this great mission. Embassy Germany was great long before I arrived, but we have a great mission in 2 senses of the word great. We have wonderful people, and we have an incredibly important set of goals. Given my family's history, it's not only an honor to serve, it's also my duty to serve. My number 1 priority in Germany, and that it is one shared by President Biden from the very first day he took office, is to advance our alliances. What does this mean specifically for the US-German relationship? We will strengthen our defense and security cooperation. Germany's recent decision to bolster the armed forces is bold and historic. We applaud what Germany has done. The complementarity and the capabilities that this enables in modernizing Germany's armed forces will be part of the effort that sustains our international law-based order. This is much more than about modernizing. This is about sustaining a law-based democratic order. Germany's decision to purchase F-35s is only one example of how the US-German partnership reinforces our collective commitment to NATO. Make no mistake about it, NATO is a defensive alliance. We will continue our unwavering support for Ukraine through our Stand With Ukraine campaign. Together with partners and allies, we will impose on Mr. Putin increasingly high costs for his brutal war of choice. Our coordinated and complementary sanctions are already having an effect. The United States and Germany are the 2 biggest donors to Ukraine, and we will continue to provide economic, military, and humanitarian aid. We will also help support Ukraine's neighbors, Poland and Moldova, as they welcome millions of refugees escaping Putin's vicious attacks on the civilian infrastructure of a free, independent, and democratic country that undoubtedly wishes to stay that way. The United States and Germany also can work together to address China's increasingly aggressive foreign policy, unfair trade practices, and human rights abuses. China has a choice. It can be a competitive partner that plays on fair ground with the West, or it can be an adversary to our values and ideals. But as Russia's war has shown us, a coordinated response is the most effective way that the EU, Germany, and the United States can address authoritarian countries. We must together stand up against human rights abuses. We must together stand for the rule of law, for fair trade, the things that create prosperity for all of our citizens. We will look at new ways to combat climate change. The Berlin Energy Transition Dialogue last week was an excellent example of how we can work together to create energy independence while increasing our security. Our embassy hosted an LNG roundtable last week that brought to bear the combined will of the private sector, the German government, and our diplomatic mission. Through our climate and energy partnership, the United States and Germany will raise global climate ambition. We must get to climate carbon neutrality. We owe it not only and not mainly to ourselves, but to our children, our grandchildren, and to all future generations. We will develop and deploy critical energy technologies and enable emerging economies to accelerate towards net zero future. Together with our European partners, we will use the US-EU Trade and Technology Council to demonstrate to the world how market-based financial, trade, and tech policies can improve the lives of our citizens and be a force for prosperity. The Trade and Technology Council will increase the competitiveness of the transatlantic economy, and our joint leadership can help set global norms for critical technologies based on shared democratic values. Our second goal is to innovate inclusively. To leverage our alliance to address global problems, we will need out-of-the-box thinking, new solutions, powered by the next generation. And it's wonderful to see so many young people today in this audience. Later this month, we will celebrate Transatlantic Innovation Week across Germany. We will highlight how German and American schools and universities partnering with businesses and entrepreneurs can work most productively together. We will promote inclusive innovation by dealing with problems openly, reaching rules transparently, and applying them fairly, allowing goods, ideas, and most importantly, people to move more freely and productively. Defending a rules-based order means protecting the right of all countries to choose their own path, free from coercion, free from intimidation, against those actively working to make the internet less secure and more closed and fractured. We need and we will defend an open, interoperable, secure, and reliable internet. The technologies that we all are dealing with every day, the handies, the cell phones that we have in our pockets, can be designed either for the good of humanity, or they can be designed for the opposite. Last month, President Biden and European Commission President von der Leyen announced a transatlantic privacy framework. This deal reflects a shared and principled recognition of the importance of trusted data flows and a common commitment to the rule of law and data protection. A reliable, legal-based transatlantic data flow paves the way for a more inclusive digital economy, one that will benefit small businesses and consumers alike. The framework builds upon our constructive negotiations, and it lays the foundation for further economic cooperation. Being inclusive also means engaging the next generation, something I've devoted a large part of my career to. We all need to work so that decision-making and our forums of decision-making reflect our diverse communities, whether in the United States or in Germany. Inclusivity means not only mentorship, but also sponsorship, actively bringing to the table those who previously have been denied access. I challenge all the leaders in this room to think about what you're doing, not only to mentor, but to sponsor the next generation. I have asked my whole team to engage in this uplifting effort. It is so inspiring to see and to hear the ambitions of young people. We also have to give diverse and young audiences seats at the table. History shows that new voices bring innovative solutions to the fore. And this brings me to our third big goal, which is the heartbeat of this historic Zeitenwende. I have been fiercely committed to this my whole life, and it has never been more important than today. We will defend democracy. Democracy is under attack in Germany, in Europe, in the United States, and globally. Calling the defense of democracy the defining challenge of our time, President Biden convened world leaders in the first ever summit for democracy last December. That forum for dialogue also initiated concrete action towards global democratic renewal. As Russia's disinformation campaign so chillingly demonstrates, we must constantly advocate for our core democratic values. The best defense is often a good offense. Freedom and prosperity, inclusion and equity, human rights and the rule of law. This is what sets us apart from those authoritarian leaders like Mr. Putin, who rule through violence, fear, and lies. We must be united by our common democratic values. We will defend our liberty, our security, and our prosperity against Putin's aggression, against an adversarial PRC, and against other malign actors and actions. And we will stand up for those people under attack. I've been asked more than once since I've come here to this wonderful country and to this great city, I've been asked this question more than once. Can Germany depend upon American democracy? My answer is a resounding yes. Why? Because millions of Americans are working every single day to make our democracy stronger. Yes, because the United States has built into our Constitution that we strive for a more perfect union. We always think about that. We don't always succeed, but it is a constant in our striving and in our Constitution. Yes, because along with our partners, we are staunchly supporting Ukraine to defend democracy on the battlefield. For as President Biden says, Democracy does not happen by accident. We all need to work hard for it together. So this is my first official speech, and I speak to you at a university closely tied to the reset of the German-American partnership right after World War II. The US government, through the Marshall Plan, played a crucial role in that diplomatic era, a crucial role in the diplomacy of that era, and it helped to launch a partnership based on a commitment to common values. Among the most fundamental of our shared values is the free and robust exchange of ideas. President Stiegler, thank you for speaking towards that. This free and robust exchange of ideas must take place in universities. Fittingly, the Marshall Plan was announced at a university by Secretary of State George Marshall in a commencement address at Harvard, my alma mater. 75 years later, 3/4 of a century later, let us remember that the Marshall Plan went against all traditions of foreign policy. In a path-breaking show of inclusive innovation, President Truman persuaded skeptics on both sides of the Atlantic by arguing that the Allies had an obligation to rebuild and play a positive role at the outset of a new Germany. He placed the initiative within the framework of American values as an essential means to maintain freedom, democracy, and security. The Marshall Plan asked Europeans to handle their own recovery, to sit down together and come up with a coordinated plan for using the assistance offered by the United States. It was an example, a historic example, of the vision, openness and honesty, courage and respect across divides that leadership requires. Here, too, lessons learned from the Marshall Plan are reflected today in the unity of our shared commitment to addressing the challenges of our time. Not only did Germany emerge from this era with fabulous universities like this one, but it also emerged from that era with lessons that still resonate with us today about seizing new beginnings to redefine a better future, about finding common ground to move forward, and about ceaselessly taking step after step to make certain that the horrors of the Holocaust are not repeated anywhere in the world. I began my remarks with a reference to Chancellor Scholz's historic speech, making and marking a Zeitenwende. More recently, he described the readiness of the German people to help and their open-heartedness towards the people in and from Ukraine as an example of the glue that holds our country together. It is a ray of hope in these dark times. Ein Lichtblick in dunklen Tagen. Speaking of rays of hope, I often hear rather despairing talk about younger generations of Americans and Germans that do not understand the importance of the transatlantic alliance because they did not live through the many experiences of the 20th century that bonded our two nations together. I have spent a good part of my career closely observing and, I think more importantly, supporting young people in addressing the challenges in this new era. I have to tell you, I am the opposite of despairing. I am incredibly impressed by their creativity and commitment to stand up for the values that will determine their future and the future of our entire world. Whether it be in defense of a green economy, in defense of human rights, or humanitarian aid, younger generations of Germans and Americans alike are not reluctant to talk about and to aspire to leading. That is yet another important reason to be hopeful as we stand today at a Zeitenwende, a turning point in history that requires creative and vigorous defense of our deepest values. My colleagues and I want to say in conclusion, absolutely pledge that we will do our best to invigorate a robust transatlantic exchange with dialogue, with a focus on the generations who are the greatest hope and the future of our democracy. I am eager to hear from you, starting here and now, about what we can do together to make the hard, good work ahead maximally constructive. Vielen Dank. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Gutmann. And so speaking of dialogue, we can now move to our discussion. Thank you very much to our moderator, Michaela Kufner from Deutsche Welle, who has joined us today. And with that, we have microphones in the audience, so if you'd like to ask a question, just raise your hand and we'll get you a mic. Over to you, Michaela. Thank you.
Yes, Ambassador, thank you very much for mapping out for the very first time in your speech what your main focus here will be. And my job is Chief Political Editor for Deutsche Welle, so normally I try to explain what's happening politically in Germany, and that has been quite a turning point, quite a Zeitenwende in the past weeks. This is your debate, so do indicate when you have questions. I will keep drawing you in. And when we were just talking before this started, we realized that exactly 1 year ago, you got the call from the president to become ambassador. Now, I think you are the only one in the room who's so far received a call by the US president offering a new job. So maybe you can just tell us about that moment exactly 1 year ago.
Well, first of all, thank you very much. Is this on?
Yes.
Yes. Thank you very much for being here, and thank you all so very much for such a warm welcome. And I have to say, I feel at home in this wonderful university. So yes, Michaela and I were just speaking before I got on stage, and she asked me about how I got called by President Biden, and I realized it was exactly a year ago today. And I was surprised. I think all of you would be surprised too. I was surprised. Got a call, asked, would you hold for the president? And of course, I did. And he said, he asked me whether I would consider being his ambassador to Germany. And I said it would be a great honor. And of course I had to ask my husband, but I'm sure he would support me. And then I thought, I told my team at the University of Pennsylvania many, many months later, because after having a conversation with the president, I also got a text that said, congratulations, from somebody else on the president's team that said, congratulations, tell no one. So I had already told my husband. I don't think no one included my husband. But I later told my team at the University of Pennsylvania, who asked me what I said, of course I said yes. As I've told you, when the president calls you, you have to say yes. So it was an amazing moment, and it's only gotten more amazing. It was, I have to say, very personal because he was aware of my family background, and I'm sure that had something also to do with why it was such an emotional moment for me. But I'm a huge believer in what President Biden has set out to do during his presidency in bringing our country closer to Germany and closer to our allies in Europe and all around the world. So for me, it's not only a job, or not even mainly a job, it is, as we say, a mission. There's another term for it, a calling. I feel called to do this.
And you did actually mention that in your speech as well, that your father in 1934 had to leave with the family. At the same time, I mean, he had the presence of mind to do that and persuade his 4 siblings to do exactly the same. Now coming back, I mean, none of us imagined that you would arrive here in the circumstances that we're seeing. We're seeing over the weekend terrible pictures, terrible images. You've said every decent person needs to stand up to this right now. When you look at Olaf Scholz, who you've praised for his Zeitenwende, but in concrete terms, when you see the debate here in Germany over whether there should be a boycott on taking any more gas from Russia, what would the US expectation be in concrete terms, just having seen the evidence we've seen so far, which is currently being verified?
Let's begin with what we're seeing, because we really need to call it for what it is. And President Biden, Secretary Blinken, Chancellor Scholz, and others have all called for there to be international war crimes tribunal over what Mr. Putin is doing. And it's brutal, it's cruel, it's inhumane, and there are atrocities going on. That calls for action, and you ask about what actions Germany is taking. And what I have seen is a willingness on the part of Americans and Germans in office alike to do everything we can do to aid Ukraine in defending itself against Putin, and to ensure, we will not cease until we ensure that Ukraine outlasts Mr. Putin. At the same time, we must not do things that would hurt our citizens and hurt us as free democratic countries more than it would hurt Mr. Putin. And so what Secretary Blinken has said many weeks ago, which I think is still very true, is that the sanctions that Germany is taking are complementary to the ones the US and other allies are taking. And I see Germany as doing everything it can, short of harming itself more than it harms Mr. Putin. And so what Germany is working towards, and working towards more rapidly, I think, than anybody thought was possible previously, is it's doing everything to ramp down its dependency on Russian gas and oil and coal, at the same time as ensuring that German citizens can afford to be warm in the winter, not freeze in the winter, and also moving towards a green economy faster than it ever thought possible. So every challenge has opportunities. This is a terrible challenge but I think the opportunity is for Germany to do more and more. And so what you're seeing today is only part of what we're going to see moving forward, because all indications are Mr. Putin is not in a mindset yet to negotiate. But I think that an immediate embargo right now, according to all that I've known and heard, would do more harm than good to Germany. But it may, you know, as soon as it can happen, the sooner the better.
You also encourage Germany and Olaf Scholz to take a leadership role, Germany to take more of a leadership role within the European Union. At the same time, we are seeing criticism coming from Poland, also over Ukraine. We are also seeing, you mentioned the rule of law, defense of democracy, democratic standards is a struggle within the European Union. I think that the elections in Hungary show us that this will remain a struggle. If anything. So what is your concrete expectation? Does it concern you? Does it concern the United States that a country like Poland is now seeking much closer alliances directly with the United States again, when maybe you're hoping for the European Union to see more eye to eye on these core issues?
One of the great things about democracy, and I've studied democracy my whole life as well as experienced it, obviously. One of the great things, which this university also represents, is we air our disagreements in public, and we have a free press that whose job is to highlight those disagreements and inquire about them, which is what you're doing, and that's, I applaud that, and I think it's important. I see these disagreements as absolutely healthy and necessary for us to have a unity of purpose. Make no mistake, there is an absolute unity in what our goals are, and we're going to disagree about some tactics, right? So there's an absolute agreement that we will stand united, and we will continue to do more and more militarily, economically, and on humanitarian aid until Ukraine wins and Putin loses. There's a difference, you know, among the countries, not surprisingly, both in the EU and outside of the EU on precisely how to do that. I would say there's much more agreement than there is disagreement, but we're going to see a continuing set of internal negotiations and dialogue, and some of this is going to be played out in roles that I expect the leaders of Poland and Moldova and Ukraine and Germany and the US and all the other EU countries, and you know, there are many who have to agree, to air not only privately, but in public. And that's one of the great things of democracy. So I don't find that concerning. I find that reinforcing of what we have to do to make sure we get our tactics correct. But I think it's really important that everything we do helps Ukraine more than it hurts us, helps Ukraine beat Mr. Putin, and doesn't give Mr. Putin an excuse, which he's looking for, to say that NATO is aggressing on him.
Okay, and I'd like to bring in some questions if anybody in the room would, yes, lady there.
Hi. Thank you so much for coming.
Well, just wait for the microphone, please.
Thank you so much for coming and giving us this opportunity. Joanna Bryson at Hardy School. I have a question about the Marshall Plan, sort of a two-barrel question about it. You're an academic, and we were talking about open airing, problems. Why do you think similar kinds of investment in Vietnam and Iraq and Afghanistan haven't gone as well? And what do you think we can do after we win, or Ukraine wins, with whatever happens to Russia?
The Marshall Plan was very different than those other examples, and I pointed that out in what I said. The Marshall Plan said, and did, basically much more like what we're doing today with regard to Iraq. It basically offered a lot of aid and asked European countries to figure out how to use it. If Germany had not had a will, if West Germany had not had a will to become democratic, it would never have happened. So I am an academic. I've studied history and politics, And it is a very well-known historical fact that democracies have to fight for their own independence. And that's what we're doing today. And I think we all can be not only incredibly sorry, as we are, for what Ukraine and Ukrainians are going through, but incredibly supportive, as we are, to enable them to defend themselves. So make no mistake about it, we are trying to help Ukraine crush Putin's military-industrial complex. But we're not doing it for Ukraine. Ukrainians are doing it for themselves, and we're helping supply the means. They have the will, we support their will, we applaud their will, and that's the model that history teaches us works. And the model that suggests we can go in and effectively become the government or prop up the government of a country that will, cannot fight for itself just doesn't work. This is the model that works, and I think we all should realize one of the reasons I say that this is such an amazing historical era is this will work. This will work. This is why we're seeing the unity among NATO nations. This is why we're seeing that the EU and the US and the non-EU democracies can work together on this. Because history doesn't always reward virtue. I needn't tell you that. But sometimes when justice is on your side and you have a country like Ukraine more than willing, eager to fight for what it believes is right, and you have a group of countries that share those values, it makes a huge difference. And I believe in this particular case, given what we've learned from history, justice will win out in the end.
Here, the lady here, please. Just wait for the microphone, please. Oops. So that was the trickiest spot in the whole room, probably.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm Robin Kamerad, I'm the program director.
Robin?
Robin.
Hi, Robin.
I'm probably the only female Robin you'll meet in Germany. The program director of the American Council on Germany, and a recent alum of the University of Pennsylvania. As the first...
Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you. As the first female ambassador, how are you going to advocate for gender rights, particularly as we look at some of the states as they push against LGBTQI rights?
So I'm very proud of the fact that the University of Pennsylvania has, year after year, been named the #1 LGBTQ-friendly university in the United States. And that didn't happen by accident, just like democracy doesn't happen by accident. I will do everything I can to advocate for the rights of all individuals, regardless of gender or sexual orientation. That is part of defending democracy, it's a part of innovating inclusively, and it's part of advancing our alliances. Everything that I have seen that has moved every country forward, every institution forward, and every family forward is opening our hearts and minds to individual freedom. I mean, it's really the freedom to be who you know yourself to be. So I look forward to working with organizations and associations in Germany to further these rights. One way I found that increasing opportunities for women and LGBTQ individuals works is to enable people to get to know people who are different from them. Now, a lot of families have people who have different sexual orientations and gender orientations, but a lot of people don't. And I think I can use my platform, if you will, as ambassador, and I know that our embassy is eager for this, to bring different organizations together and literally to bring different people to the table. And talk about and then act on how we can further these rights. It's very, very important.
And the next question here in second row.
Hello, my name is Eric. I'm a freelance journalist and I lead a German-American exchange program for journalists. All your predecessors and a lot of American presidents, going back to Bill Clinton, have urged Germany to do more on their own defense. And this happened the day you came here, that Germany decided to do more. What will you be doing with all your free time now? And do you think Germans realize that this is for their own good and not because somebody's telling them to do it?
So, Eric, thank you for that question. It was a remarkable coincidence. I sat in my confirmation hearings, and at your confirmation hearings, you're invited to say what some of your goals are, your highest priorities, because you only speak for 5 minutes. So, before being questioned, that is. And so one of my goals was to urge Germany to get to 2% NATO commitment. Check. Another one of my goals was to urge Germany to modernize its military and not have a gap in that. Check. Another one of my goals was, we really did believe, and President Biden said this, and I said it, that Nord Stream 2 is a bad deal, and to urge Germany not to go ahead with Nord Stream 2. Check, right? However, the further invasion by Russia of Ukraine has more than made up for the goals, as you could hear from what I said, that remain ahead. So that's, there's still to go. And you had a second part to your question. What was that?
I think Germany is
internalized the need to do it themselves. Right. So it's really, it's incredibly heartening to me to see that the German public has just rallied to this. Now, Germany is a democracy like the US is. You're never going to get 100%. In fact, if you get 60%, that's remarkable. And Germany has well over that of a population that supports this. And make no mistake about it, nobody forced Germany to do this. This was the will of the German government, supported by the will of the people. I think the harder question is, how long will it last? And I hope that it will last as long as there is need for a NATO. So I think my answer to you is yes, that the German public, by and large, realizes that this is important for Germany to do. The German government realizes it. And it's remarkable, because I was also asked, by a lot of people, what do you think is going to happen after a Merkel government, right, where you have a coalition? And we didn't know. Nobody could know how the coalition would spin out. And my answer to that, and so this is my final answer to you, because it's a really important question you asked, is my answer is, every challenge brings opportunity. I know that a number of people have said to me that's a very American way of looking at things. But I really believe that that is what our experience today, and Germany is experiencing it today. I don't think it's just an American thing. I think there's a real truth to it. What Germany has done is recognize the opportunity of this challenge, and I absolutely applaud that.
Another question here from the lady with the pink mask, Stormy Miltner. Again, that very difficult spot in the audience. And I'm actually still... Oh, yeah, over there. And I'm still genuinely on the lookout for some students asking questions. So if there are some genuine enrolled students who have a question, do let me know. Raise your hand.
Thanks.
Okay, right. You'll be right after, please.
Okay, hiding behind there.
There is.
Thank you so very much for these inspiring words. I'm Stormy Miltner. I'm the director of the Aspen Institute here in Berlin. And it is really, really wonderful to see that the restart of the transatlantic relationship, rebuilding transatlantic relations, is not just rhetoric, but really action. And I see that so clearly when looking at the Trade and Technology Council, where real work takes place. There's an issue which hasn't been covered yet in the discussion, and it might be surprising that I raise it, and that is agriculture. This is an area where we haven't seen eye to eye often in the transatlantic relationship. It's obviously not part of the TTC, but looking at global agriculture markets and the stress and the rising food prices and increasing inequality and poverty due to shortages. I was wondering if this should also be on the transatlantic agenda. Thank
Absolutely. One of the great concerns that we have is food insecurity that can be heightened by Mr. Putin's war, right? And that raises the larger issue that you raise of how important it is to increase the robust trade and investment in agriculture that actually feeds the world. And so we're now, again, at a great challenge because of this brutal war. And you should all know that we talk a lot about gas and oil shortages, energy shortages, but there also are impending and existing food shortages. So we're going to have to focus a lot on that. And one of my wonderful opportunities as ambassador is to welcome congressional delegations to Berlin and to Germany. We call them CODELs. And I can tell you that our Congress, senators and representatives on our Congress, are very concerned, especially those in agricultural states, about how we can help with Europe, with Germany, make sure that there's enough food for the world. And this will go beyond the alliances of the EU and NATO and the US to also bring in South America, Africa, Asia, huge parts of not only our countries, but countries in the world that really need a more robust agricultural system to sustain our populations.
Please.
Hi, so I'm a student at the John F. Kennedy Institute, and I was wondering, you've mentioned...
Can you tell me your name?
Yes, it's Anne.
Anne.
You've mentioned that as an academic, you really focused on sponsoring young people. I wonder how you envision that as a diplomat now, and maybe as a larger part of the diplomatic mission, and also particularly in the hopefully post-COVID era, where a lot of young people, I think, are feeling that they've been done a raw deal, really.
I don't blame young people for feeling that. To see high school seniors and college first-year students and graduate students have to do so much of their work online just broke my heart. And my, happiest day was when I could welcome students back into class, into Penn's campus. So you asked me, it's a question I asked myself shortly after President Biden called. I said, okay, what could I do as ambassador that would build on my experience as a teacher and a scholar and a university president as ambassador? And so I'm happy to tell you that what I'm doing with the full support of Embassy Mission Germany, our embassy in Berlin, and all of our consulates, and I actually invite all of you to be part of this, is every visit that I've made so far to a consulate, it's one day, sometimes 2 days, and I meet with youth councils. I meet with young people, and they are involved with our consulates, and we have exchange programs. There's a Bundestag Congress exchange program. There's probably someone in this room who's been part of this. There are, we have emerging young leaders forums that I met with just yesterday in Hamburg, and I met with them in Leipzig, and I met with them in Frankfurt, and we'll do in Düsseldorf and Munich. And in Berlin, there are a lot of such groups, and we're going to sponsor those groups, and we help connect them to other leaders. And this is something that's like in my DNA, if you will. And what I was so pleased about is to see that our embassy is, we have a public diplomacy unit in all of our consulates in our embassy, and we're actively involved in it. So if you, for example, want to help us in that, or anybody wants to help us in it, please reach out, and all you have to do is reach out to the embassy and we will connect you. Because here's the thing. You and young people like you, I believe, are going to absolutely ensure that this transatlantic alliance is more robust than ever moving forward. Not because you're all going to become diplomats or ambassadors, although I hope you will, some of you, but because you believe in this kind of global interchange. You know that the problems like climate change are not going to be solved unless we work across divides. You believe in empowering individuals, regardless of their sexual orientation or their gender orientation, to be leaders. And we at the embassy, and I as ambassador, are going to sponsor more and more young people in what you're doing. It means asking you first, what are your passions, what do you want to do, and then connecting you with opportunities to do that. That's what I've enjoyed most doing my whole life. I mean, when I moved from being a scholar and a teacher to being a university leader, the reason for doing that is I could do so much more. I love, by the way, teaching and scholarship, so I love it. But I realized that by empowering others who have diverse talents, much more talented than I am in so many things, by empowering them, I could do more with my life than I could do being a more solitary scholar. Teaching is another thing. I think teaching is doing God's work. You also launch people in the world. But we want to do that at the embassy, and I'm so glad you asked that, because as I look out here and I see young people and I go across Germany and meet with young people, I can tell you, you're going to make the future better. For sure. And I want you all to know that it's a good thing to aspire to lead. I could never dream about doing what I'm doing now because women didn't have the opportunities then. LGBTQ, nobody even had the words then. I literally did not know those words when I was in college. Now, and I'm going to say something else that I've been told is very American, but I think it's also, it's universal. Now, there was a kind of glass ceiling, and there still is in many places. But truly the sky's the limit if we do what you've asked, which is to sponsor young people for their future. So thank you for that.
I would just like to follow on with a question that should not just be a concern for young people, which is climate change. And I just heard, actually this morning on the radio, one of the leading scientists in Germany saying there's a real concern that this fight for democracy, you said that really is the challenge of our time, defending democracy. At the same time, the challenge of our time is climate change. And there is a real fear that attention will be drawn away from that by the United States. So maybe you can just respond to that.
Every meeting, and I've been in lots of meetings lately that I've had on energy, everyone has been punctuated by, we must do this in a way that advances combating climate change. President Biden is absolutely committed to that. Chancellor Scholz and this, this coalition with the Greens is absolutely committed to that. So we're just going to have to work harder to do it. I think the fact that we've learned to move fast and faster in unity will help us, but it's not going to happen automatically, and it's another reason why I think bringing new voices and younger people to the table is important, because younger people not only care about it, but they vote on it. Older generations care about it, but it's not at the top of their agenda on voting. And since in democracies the numbers count, I think our best hope is to make sure that this crisis is an opportunity to speed up combating climate change and also bring new voices and faces to the table to do it.
And just one final question, which could lead into a whole new debate, but your predecessor made sure that the German public is used to some straight talking from US ambassadors. When we look a bit further afield, when we look at China, we saw Olaf Scholz, but this was before the Ukraine war started, talk about that the interests of Germany and the United States may not always be tail in completely. This is something you would have never heard from German Chancellor Angela Merkel. That was during his address to the World Economic Forum. What is the message that you have for Germany? What message, what expectation do you convey here when it comes to China?
I think, and I've always been considered a straight talker, so you see what you get with me, for better or for worse. I think that even before Russia's further invasion of Ukraine, German leaders were becoming more and more aware of the pernicious actions of the PRC. And let's distinguish the PRC from the Chinese people. This is not about the Chinese people, it's not about the Russian people, it's about the regimes. We've seen intellectual property theft increase, which should be a big concern to universities as well as to businesses and society as a whole. We've seen trade dumping, we've seen gross unfair trade practices, not to mention, but to mention, the incredibly awful violations of human rights and the repression of the Uyghurs. And the threat, and also to mention, the threat to Hong Kong, the threat to Taiwan. I think that there's much more unity of view with regard to China now than there was pretty recently, just a year ago, let's say. And my message is, let's be alert early and take the measures to diversify our economies, not to have supply side dependency now, and that will avert crises later. And I think that message is falling on very open ears, and I'm hearing business people, government people, and citizens and people in civil society alike in Germany raising that before I even raise it. So I think that we have a lot of work to do beyond combating Mr. Putin's aggression, And it is not, here's what I also think is important on China. We will continue to have trade with China. We will continue to cooperate with China as long as they are willing, and I think they will be willing, to combat climate change. It's extremely important. We will also look at China as an adversary in the things that I mentioned earlier, their malign actions. And I believe Germany will do so as well. That is the receptivity I'm seeing today. And I think we just have to keep moving together. That's part of what I mean by that this transatlantic unity has to outlast our aiding Ukraine and defeating Mr. Putin.
So you're pretty far down the checklist, but there's always clearly a lot more ground to cover. Thank you very much for that debate, for taking the questions. Thank you, Professor Ziegler, for having us all here today. And thank you. It's been a great audience. Thanks for your questions.
Thank you so much.